Hi friends! Well, if you've been following along, I have been reading my way through Mistborn Era 1 and I finally finished with third book, Hero of Ages. And if you know from watching my previous videos, you might know that I loved Well of Ascension. I thought it was the best book too that I've possibly ever read. This book, on the other hand, while I really enjoyed it, I didn't enjoy it as much as the second book. I have a lot to say about it, so let's jump in. To book 3 in the Mistborn Era 1 trilogy, we see a chaotic string of events that's taking place. Everything is falling apart. They have unleashed this force from the Well of Ascension, and they're trying to figure out exactly if there is a possibility to beat it. I'm gonna jump into spoilers now because there's really no way of talking about this book without getting a bit spoilery, so if you're not interested in hearing about spoilers for this book, I suggest you stop listening now. Otherwise, we're gonna jump in 3, 2, 1. The things that I really loved about this book were the religious aspects and the lore. We have the development of this character, Ruin, and the opposite personification, which is preservation. These are two forces that push and pull, and everything requires a balance. This is something that's heavily emphasized in the book, and it's something that's been strung through all 3 books until you finally get it and it clicks. Ruin is the malevolent god in this scenario, hence their name. They want to ruin. Preservation, on the other hand, wants to preserve things, and in this case, what it wants to preserve is humankind. We come to learn that these two have kind of been in a standoff for millennia. We don't really know how either one came into existence, but we know that they couldn't create without the other, because you cannot preserve what does not already exist and you cannot ruin what does not already exist. The two of them come to this arrangement and agreement where preservation wants to create something that is sapient and creates humankind, and Ruin says that he will agree as long as one day he can destroy them. We then learn that the Well of Ascension was a prison that was built by preservation offering a part of himself to imprison Ruin for the last 1,000 years. It takes the Hero of Ages, or so we believe, to be able to unlock them or take the power from themselves. And one of the things that I thought was really interestingly done in this book is that it's really shed a new light on the Lord Ruler. We come to see him as not being this absolutely horrific figure that he was in the first book. Yes, he definitely did things that were unseemly and inhumane and quite oppressive, but we come to realize that he was being manipulated by Ruin. A lot of people have been touched by Ruin. Even though he was imprisoned, he still was able to manipulate them into doing things that they didn't necessarily want to do. In particular, Zane from the Well of Ascension. We saw just how much that was happening. We pick up this story. Everything is kind of in upheaval. We know now that Elend has become a Mistborn because he was able to eat this bead at the Well of Ascension. Vin is very paranoid over the fact that she's having to monitor Elend and train Elend, even though he is vastly stronger than she was when she first found out she was a Mistborn. They are on this quest to uncover these caches that have been hidden throughout the Empire. In each cache, there is a message that has been inscribed in steel that has been placed inside by the Lord Ruler, along with heaps of food and water. We come to learn that Ruin is able to manipulate text and speech, which is something that I found to be really interesting. And he is only unable to manipulate steel and metal. If you are going to communicate with someone about a plan in regards to Ruin, it needs to be written in metal. Story then starts to progress. We see that Elend and Vin are somewhat successful with taking over these smaller villages and or towns where they have found these caches. However, there's 2 major places in the Empire that still remain, that they know there are 2 caches that are there, and they need to know what has been inscribed on these metal plates in order to formulate some sort of plan to hopefully defeat Ruin. There's one town called Fadrex and there is another town called Urtu. One of the things that I understood about this book is that we kind of needed to have emissaries going out and representing Elend, who is now Emperor in this book. One of the things that I didn't mind, but it still it was a bit of a bummer because most of the cast of characters that I really loved from the first book was separated. In Urtu, we had Spook for the first bit of the book, and then we had Breeze and Alrion, along with Sazed for part of the book, and then in Fadrex, we had Vin and Elend, along with the Kolas, who they learned to manipulate from a tip that was given to Vin from her Kandra Tensoon. Speaking of Tensoon, I am so excited that Tensoon in this book gets POVs. I thought that the backstory for the Kandra in this book was so fascinating. I loved the lore that went along with this. I think that alone was the best part of this book, for me anyway. I loved how well and layered this was. I loved that the first contract was created with the father, aka the Lord Ruler. It was just so well done. I really liked the way that Sanderson wrote this. In addition to how it connected to the terracemen and the terrace people, I thought that this whole plot line was really, really excellent. I enjoyed that Tensoon was able to redeem himself. I will say, however, that I was devastated that Tensoon and Vin were not reunited. It struck a chord with me. I really wanted them to have some semblance of a reunification before anything happened, but it didn't come to pass. One of the other things that we really start to see in this book that I didn't absolutely love, but it might just be me, Zed is in a state of mourning, and the way that that is manifesting is that he's no longer interested in prophesizing and preaching religion. This is something that has been integral to the character for the last 2 books. We know that his ability and skills as a keeper are tied to his ability to retain knowledge pertaining to religions. I think he says that there's something like 520 religions, even though some of them are variations of the same one, and it ends up being something like 300 religions when it's all said and done. I loved that he used to preach different religions to people in times of crisis in the books. I thought it was just a really nice aspect of the character, and I found it disappointing that this was lacking in this book. It just seemed kind of rushed for a relationship that felt really rushed for me in the last book, that his romantic partner has now died, even though they couldn't physically be involved in that way. That's not to say that you can't have romantic relationships that don't involve physicality. It seemed like a very brief relationship in time for him to be in this state of duress. I didn't love that aspect of the story, but I did like learning a bit more about the religions that Sanderson implemented into this world. One thing that I will give Sanderson major credit for, however, is that I know he is a practicing Mormon. He is able to write different vantage points of religions very interestingly. At one point in the story, we almost see Zed becoming an atheist, and it's believable. We then see different parts of the story where faith is regained. People are encouraging him to find faith. I like the way that Sanderson is able to put aside his own personal beliefs and take on the ability to display from a various different viewpoints as to how other people might view religion in this world and in other worlds. I thought that part was a really good asset to the story, so I did enjoy that part. In terms of new characters that we see introduced in this book, my favorite new character is Yaman. He is an obligator who is very similar to Elend. However, he believes that the Lord Ruler is still alive and is controlling all of this, and he's trying to figure out what Vin's role is in this religious order, because as an obligator, he is part of the religious order that served and followed the Lord Ruler, and he can't fathom in his mind that the Lord Ruler is dead. It just seems impossible. One character that needs to be discussed that I feel like doesn't get the proper love that they deserve, and I feel so terrible for this character, is Marsh. Marsh from book 1 is this character who gets pulled into this ragtag team by his brother Kelsier, and we know very quickly from that book he's in a dangerous position. He's quite precariously close to the Lord Ruler, and as a reward, he gets promoted to being a Steel Inquisitor, meaning that he has the metal spikes pushed through his eyes, and he very much loses who he is, physicality and personality-wise. That starts to really become evident in this book, where we see the concept of hemalurgy, which is how these spikes, these metal spikes, are able to infiltrate people and influence their thoughts, and we learn very quickly that that is in fact Ruin that is able to do that. I thought this was a really fascinating aspect of the book. As you're reading it, you can know from book 2 and then in book 3 also that Vin at one point is able to control the mists in a way that she hasn't been able to previously. And I thought it was a really good reveal afterwards that you found out she had a spike, aka the earring, that had been in her ear this whole time. Once that was removed, she was able to assume this power that she otherwise wouldn't have had. Now, I am fine. I'm totally fine with the typical hero not being the person that necessarily saves the day. Everything is coming to a head. We found out that these poor Kalas were also people that have been stabbed with these spikes. Marsh is encroaching, ruin is encroaching, ash is coming down from the sky, it's covering the earth. The earth is on fire and there's earthquakes that are happening all the time. The Kalas that are now being controlled by ruin are storming the pits of Hathsin, where we have found out is where the Atium is this whole time, and that is what Ruin needs. This is going to be the final battle. At this point, Vin becomes a deity-like figure. I didn't love this part of the story. I don't know. For me, I get it, but I didn't love this part of the story. I almost found that the ending of this book felt slightly rushed compared to everything else in the previous books. I felt that Sanderson had taken his time to carefully explain things and it was well laid out. And then the end, it's like 15 pages and so much stuff happens and then it's just done. In that we see Van become a deity. She takes over the role of preservation. Poor Elend is decapitated. Vin sacrifices herself, finding out that you need to be made of both ruin and preservation in order to destroy ruin, and is gone into the abyss. We then see Sazed, who has been reciting these prophecies about the Hero of Ages for most of the last part of the book because he's been conferring with the Kandra, and we see that Sazed is in fact the Hero of Ages, which is fine. I have no problem with Sazed being the Hero of Ages. He's a good choice. My main issue is that the terminology of it having to be someone that's not male. I find that Sazed identifies as a man in the book. He is referred to as a man in the book. It's because he was castrated and became a eunuch from a very young age. I don't think this disqualifies him. So it felt kind of awkward that someone who had been tortured and therefore punished into thinking that they weren't man enough fit the bill for the description of the Hero of Ages. That was just me personally. I still like the fact that Sazed was the Hero of Ages. It's fine. The end of the book comes around. We see who lives. We see who unfortunately has perished. It seems like there is this kind of happily ever after from the Netherworld where Sazed has left his book and informed Spook, who took on a massive role in this story, that Vin is okay, Ellen's okay, Kelser's okay, and by the way, you're now Mistborn. It very much leaves the door open, I feel like, for stories with Spook and possibly some of our other characters. I'm hoping 10 soon. It was an okay way to end the book. I just feel like I wanted a little bit more. It might be because I got so accustomed to reading it and grew so attached to the characters. I don't know. I liked this book. I would give it a 4. It was probably the book I liked the least out of the trilogy, but I still thought that it was a very good book. Highly recommend the trilogy as a whole. It's one of those things that I may go back and reread it at some point, and I might find a whole new appreciation for the third book now that I know what comes to pass. If you want to let me know what you thought about this trilogy and this book in particular, you can let me know in the comments. The best way to support me is to hit that like button and subscribe and leave me a comment. I'm happy to get back to you. If you want to come chat with me about books and cats, you can find me on Instagram at FantasyOwash, and I will see you next time.